Let's talk about SMEs and support for SMEs. Nigeria's state-owned Bank of Industry plans to raise about 750 million euros, about $883 million from international debt markets this year for lending to companies affected by the COVID-19 pandemic in Africa's largest economy. Chief Executive Officer Olukayode Pitan said in a virtual interview, he noted that the lender will raise anywhere between 500 million to 700 million euros, and that those funds will go towards impacted SMEs. However, are SMEs knowledgeable about the support structures that are out in Nigeria? So joining us to talk about this, we have Mr. Arthur Nkemeh, who is the head of SME Banking at Wema Bank. Thank you so much for joining us, sir. Appreciate it. Good morning. Good morning. So for SMEs in Nigeria, how important is this to have, I guess, knowledge of sources of finance that are out there to support them?
Okay, fine. Thank you. The knowledge of sources of finance is very important because you must have to know where the financing opportunity exists before you can access those finances.
Yeah.
So the both are interwoven, and it's also very important too that the SMEs know the right financing to go for because various businesses might have some funding that is tailored for a specific business. So first and foremost, they must have a knowledge as per where the finance opportunity exists, and secondly, know the kind of financing that suits their business sector, and of course, then now go for this financing.
Great stuff. Financing is one thing. The regulatory environment is another. What about the importance of not just knowledge of finance, knowledge of the regulatory environment that they operate in?
It's very important. I mean, it should even rank top priority, for any.
Oh, you would rank it above finance access.
Yeah. So it's very, very important because beyond financing, you also need to look at the regulatory compliance that as it affects the business of the SME. So, of course, we have various SMEs in various sectors of the economy, and we also have various regulators, of course, regulating these various sectors of the economy where the SMEs play. So it's very important, and that's what we also try to do, to also encourage them because, okay, take for instance, if an SME does not have proper knowledge about some regulatory implications or new legislations that affect that business sector, the cost of not knowing can be very expensive. If you look at the recent finance bill, for example, you find out that small businesses have been exempted from paying things like CIT and child education tax, and you can even make some capital claim on software. So for an SME that does not know, might not be able to leverage on these incentives, and that also cuts across various other sectors like the guys in food and drugs. Of course, need to know things happening around NAFDAC, what are the regulations, and some directive from the regulator. So if the SME does not know all of these things, the cost of not knowing can be very expensive. So it's very important that they do know.
Great stuff. Great stuff. So putting those two together, how would, from your vantage point, how would you assess the awareness of SMEs of the environment they're working in, from finance to regulation and so on?
Okay, fine. So the SMEs are most times more interested in knowing about financing options available for their businesses.
Yeah.
But then not intentionally downplaying the regulatory implications or the regulatory compliance issues that they need to adhere to and observe, and they also need to be helped. Okay, so stakeholders need to also help in educating these MSMEs and all that, and that's why, like what we're also doing in my own institution, we've just launched a Wema Bank SME Business School, where we are training these guys free of charge, to put them through things around regulatory compliance, leadership, taxation, financing models, and all of that. So it's important that they pay attention. Then we as also players in the industry also need to do a whole lot more. So both from the government and the private sector need to come together to help educate them, and also working closely with the respective regulatory bodies.
Great stuff. So, well, maybe you've already answered the question. If I was to ask you what SMEs are clamoring for in terms of priorities that talk to you, is it finance or?
Of course, finance comes first. Finance comes from also coming from what we're just pulling out from COVID. A whole of them had their capital decimated. Some of them are just trying to come back to business and all that. So finance it's key to them, and that's what they're basically clamoring for.
Power supply and what it means for overhead costs. Please speak on that. How the SMEs you're dealing with.
Power is key. Power is key. I mean, there's a report that came out last year that Nigerians spent about $14 billion in powering their generators and servicing it. So the running cost is usually very expensive. So SMEs are really being beaten a whole lot about the huge cost that they expend on power. So for example, let's look at that micro SME who is a barber, that has a barber shop that probably charges about 500 naira to cut a hair. He has to run generator for like about 13 hours a day, to keep his business going. So by the time you net off his operational costs, power, and pay his employees, what is really his margin? So power is really a major challenge for MSMEs. And you can imagine from that last report of about $14 billion being spent, if 50% of that amount is saved and plunked back to the economy, you can imagine what the impact would be. Exactly. So it cannot be overemphasized.
Wow. What about FX liquidity, the impact on SMEs?
Oh yeah, we all know, Nigeria is largely an import-dependent economy, so a whole lot of what we consume here are imported, and of course that speaks to FX. And of course, it's been a challenge. It's not something new, but of course, SMEs are very resilient doing business in Nigeria. So the Central Bank of Nigeria, we're also happy that they're floating some initiatives and taking some right steps in terms of trying to address the FX issues. So yes, it's a challenge, but our SMEs working around it. Yeah, they're working around it, and of course, we're also happy that the regulatory, the CBN, like I rightly mentioned, is trying to address that issue going forward. All
right. Well, you're a bank. What are SMEs telling you about cost of lending? Huh? What about that, author?
So for us, we are very SME-centric, and of course, we also know that a lot of financial institutions in Nigeria are trying to support. So lending costs, yes, there are various windows, right? That's why I did mention earlier that for an SME, you also need to understand your business model and also know whether there are some funding opportunities, or funding options that might be lower. So sometimes, depending on the kind of SME or the business type, some of them are taken to some DFIs whom also support in providing, a very some lower lending cost, which we also take on lending and lend to them. And as an institution, we also try as much as possible to try to keep the cost minimal. We're also not insulated in what's happening in the country. We're also players here.
Right.
Okay. And also sometimes we also do some things around gender initiative, trying to support, the people in gender doing businesses in giving them some kind of concessionary financing. So cost is there, yes, because if you also look at inflation, it's also part of what is affecting it. Look at the money market. The money market has also gone up as against what it was doing some 8, 7, 10 months ago. So we are juggling it, and we're also working with DFIs and also the regulator, and to try to have several funding options available to these MSMEs and make sure that we bespoke these funding options to these SMEs to ensure that we lend to them in a very bearable manner that will also ensure that they are productive and profitable.
Great stuff. And of course, for our viewers, DFIs is Development Financial Institutions. Great stuff. So what's your, I guess, outlook for the rest of the year with respect to SMEs? How do you see things? We're almost at the finish line. Only a few months left.
Truthfully, we have some headwinds. There are some challenges with respect to inflation, security, which is also hampering people from moving around and all of that. But of course, good enough, the government is addressing some of these issues. The security aspect is being addressed. The issue of FX is also being addressed by the regulators. Like I did mention, Nigerian SMEs are very resilient, and the good thing about it is that we have for me, the dark days are over. That was during COVID.
Right.
So post-COVID, SMEs have been rebounding, and with the support of the financial institutions and of course the other stakeholders and players and the federal government initiatives being launched by the CBN, I see SMEs, of course, closing on a high note at the end of the year.
Optimistic, huh?
Yeah, very optimistic.
So you got to be optimistic as far as things are concerned. Mr. Arthur Nkemeh, who is the head of SME Banking at Wema Bank, thank you so much for joining us and taking us through the SME landscape. Good optimistic point to end on for the show. Thank you so much.